The dust-laden wind carried the jeers and mockery across the auction platform as Penelope O'Malley stood with her head bowed, trying to disappear into herself. Montana Territory, 1875, a place where second chances were as rare as rainfall in August. Her tattered calico dress hung loosely on her thin frame, and the shackle around her ankle clinked with each nervous shift of her weight. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the town square of Victor, Montana, announcing her as damaged goods, barely worth the starting bid. $20 for the woman. Look at her scarred face, can't speak proper, and heaven knows what else is wrong with her. But she's got two hands that can work. $20. Penelope kept her eyes fixed on the rough wooden boards beneath her feet. The scar that ran from her temple to her jaw was burning under the scrutiny of the crowd. She'd been sold once before to a mining company that needed kitchen help, but after the accident that left her scarred and her speech halting, they decided she wasn't worth keeping. Do I hear 20? Anyone? 15 then. The crowd shifted, murmuring with disinterest. Men spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Women clutched their children closer as if her misfortune might be catching. Penelope closed her eyes, wondering if it would be better if no one bid at all. Perhaps they would just let her go, though she knew that was unlikely. Debtors without buyers often ended up in territorial prison. $10. Surely someone needs a pair of working hands. She can still haul water and scrub floors. A movement from the back of the crowd caught her attention. A tall man in a worn duster pushed his way forward. His face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with several days' worth of stubble. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work and harder decisions. $5. Final offer before she's shipped to the territorial prison. The man in the duster raised his hand. $5, he called, his voice deep and clear. The auctioneer's face lit up. We have 5. Do I hear 6? Silence fell over the crowd. No one was willing to outbid even this paltry sum. 5 going once, twice, sold to the gentleman in the back. The man strode forward as the sheriff removed the shackle from Penelope's ankle. She kept her gaze downward, her hands trembling slightly. What kind of man bought a woman for $5? What would he expect of her? Sign here, the sheriff instructed, pushing a ledger toward the buyer. She's your responsibility now. The man scrawled his signature. Yates Xavier, he said, loud enough for Penelope to hear. Then he turned to her, and for the first time she got a clear look at his face. He wasn't young, perhaps 35, with weathered features that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes were a striking blue, clear and direct as they assessed her. Can you walk? He asked her, his tone neither harsh nor particularly kind. Penelope nodded, her throat tight with fear. My wagon's this way. He gestured toward the edge of town. As they walked away from the auction platform, whispers followed them. Poor Xavier, wasting good money on that one. Probably just needs someone to cook at that lonely ranch of his. She won't last a week out there. Yates ignored them all, his stride purposeful. When they reached a weathered wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, he gestured for her to climb up. I can sit in the back, Penelope offered, her voice halting and soft. You'll sit up front, he replied firmly. Roads are rough, back's no place for a person. Confused by this small consideration, Penelope allowed him to help her onto the wooden seat. Her stomach growled audibly. She hadn't eaten since the previous morning. Without comment, Yates reached into a satchel behind the seat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Bread and cheese, he said, handing it to her. Eat slow, don't make yourself sick. Penelope took the food with shaking hands. Thank you, sir. Name's Yates, not sir. Yes, Yates. He clicked his tongue and the horses began to move. They traveled in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. My ranch is about 3 hours from town. It's not much, but it's peaceful. Got a small cabin with an extra room. That'll be yours. Penelope looked at him in surprise. My own room, of course. He glanced at her with a frown. What did you think I was buying you for? She looked away, unable to answer, his jaw tightened. I needed help with the ranch, nothing more. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by shame at her assumption. They rode in silence for a while longer before she gathered the courage to ask, "Why me? I'm damaged. Everyone says so." Yates kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I don't see damaged goods, Miss O'Malley. I see a person who's had a hard time of it, same as most folks out here." "Penelope," she said quietly. "My name is Penelope." He nodded once. "Penelope, then." As the wagon rolled through the Montana wilderness, Penelope watched the town of Victor disappear behind them. For the first time in years, she felt something other than despair, a tiny flicker of hope, fragile as a newly struck match in a storm. The Xavier Ranch came into view as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the distant mountains. It wasn't grand by any means, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. A creek ran alongside the property, its waters glinting in the golden light. "It's beautiful," Penelope said softly, genuinely surprised by the tranquil setting. Yates made a non-committal sound, but she caught the hint of pride in his expression. "Been working it for 7 years now. Started with nothing but the land." As they drew closer, Penelope could see a small vegetable garden near the cabin and chickens pecking in a fenced yard. There was order to the place, tools hung neatly on the barn wall, woodpiles stacked precisely, paths swept clear of debris. This was a man who took care in his work. He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and hopped down, coming around to help her. Penelope hesitated, unaccustomed to such courtesies, before placing her hands on his shoulders as he lifted her down. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," he said, leading her toward the cabin. "Then I need to tend to the horses." The cabin was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furnishings were sparse but sturdy: a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves lined with books that surprised her. "You read?" she asked before she could stop herself. Yates looked almost embarrassed. "Winter nights are long out here." He showed her to a small room off the main area. It contained a narrow bed with a quilt, a chest for clothing, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I've had in years," Penelope replied honestly. Yates nodded. "I'll leave you to settle in. There's a wash basin and water pitcher on the chest. Dinner in an hour." After he left, Penelope sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in her circumstances. The mattress, though thin, was clean and free of vermin. The quilt showed signs of wear but had been carefully mended. She ran her fingers over the fabric, wondering about the hands that had stitched it. She used the wash basin to clean herself as best she could, wincing as the cool water touched the sensitive skin of her scar. When she was done, she had nothing to change into. The tattered dress she wore was her only possession. A knock at the door startled her. "Yes." Yates's voice came through the wood. "Left some things outside your door. Might fit well enough for now." When she opened the door, she found a folded bundle containing a simple cotton dress, somewhat faded but intact, and a flannel nightgown. Beside these was a pair of worn but serviceable boots. "These belong to your wife?" she asked when she emerged for dinner, now wearing the dress that hung a bit loose on her frame. Yates looked up from the stew he was stirring. "No, my sister stayed here a few years back before she married and moved to Oregon." "Oh." Penelope wasn't sure why this information relieved her. Is there something I can do to help with dinner? It's nearly ready. You can set the table if you like. Plates are there. He nodded toward a cabinet. They ate in relative silence, Penelope trying not to devour the hearty stew too quickly. It was simple fare beef, potatoes, carrots, but after months of near starvation, it tasted better than any fine restaurant meal she'd had in her previous life. "Tomorrow I'll show you what needs doing around here," Yates said as they finished. "Nothing too strenuous at first. You need to build your strength back." "I'm stronger than I look," Penelope assured him, "and I'm a quick learner." "No doubt, but there's no point in working yourself to collapse." He cleared his throat. "What can you tell me about yourself? Where were you before Victor?" Penelope tensed. "Does it matter?" "Not particularly. But if we're to live under the same roof, seems we should know something about each other." She considered this, then offered, "I was born in Boston. My father was a merchant. When he died, there were debts. I was sold to cover them. Ended up working in a mining camp kitchen in Idaho Territory. There was an accident, a fire. That's how." Her hand moved unconsciously to her scarred cheek. "And they sold you off because of it," Yates concluded, his voice hardening. "They said I frightened the miners, and my speech." She swallowed. "The fire damaged my throat. It's better now, but sometimes I still struggle." Yates studied her for a moment. "People can be cruel about things that don't matter. The scar matters to most. Not to me." He stood and gathered their plates. "I should check on the livestock before turning in. There's a lamp in your room if you want to stay up." Left alone, Penelope moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. Shakespeare, Dickens, some volumes of poetry, practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry. She selected a slim volume of Wordsworth's poetry and took it to her room, where she read by lamplight until her eyes grew heavy. That night, she slept on a real bed for the first time in over 2 years, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through pines. It should have been frightening, this strange place with a man she didn't know, but somehow it wasn't. For the first time in a long while, Penelope felt safe. The next morning she woke at dawn, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and she hurriedly dressed, determined to prove her worth. She found Yates already at work in the barn, mucking out stalls. Without a word, she picked up a spare pitchfork and began to help. He glanced at her in surprise but didn't object. "Have you worked with horses before?" he asked after they had finished and moved on to feeding the animals. "Some," she replied. "Mostly kitchen work, but I've tended horses when needed." He showed her around the property, explaining the daily chores: feeding chickens, collecting eggs, tending the garden, hauling water from the creek. The work was demanding but varied, and Penelope welcomed it. Physical labor was preferable to the uncertainty of idleness. "What will you have me do first?" she asked when the tour was complete. Yates considered her for a moment. "The garden needs weeding and the chickens need tending, but first breakfast." Over a simple meal of oatmeal and coffee, Yates explained more about the ranch. "I raise cattle primarily, not many, 50 head or so. Keep a few horses too. Sell some each year at the spring auction in Helena. It's enough to get by." "You do all this alone?" "Hire help during calving season and roundup. Rest of the time it's just me." He paused. "And now you?" Penelope nodded, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. "Do you go to town often?" "Once a month for supplies. More if needed." He finished his coffee. "Town's not my favorite place, nor mine," she admitted. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then we have that in common." Days settled into a routine. Penelope rose early, preparing breakfast while Yates tended to the animals. They worked through the morning, breaking for a midday meal, then continuing until dusk. Evenings were spent in quiet companionship, Yates often reading or working on accounts, Penelope mending clothes or learning to knit from a book she found on the shelf. Her strength returned gradually. The regular meals and physical work added flesh to her thin frame, and color returned to her pale cheeks. Her speech improved too, growing more fluid as she used her voice daily. Yates noticed the changes but said little. He was not a talkative man by nature, preferring action to words. Still, Penelope began to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the furrow of his brow, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. A month into her stay, Yates announced they would be going to town for supplies. "You don't have to come if you'd rather not," he offered, knowing her aversion to Victor. "I'll come," she said firmly. "I can't hide forever." The journey was tense for Penelope, her stomach knotting as the town came into view. She'd changed in the past month, healthier, stronger, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder of her past. In town, they drew stares and whispers. Yates ignored them, moving purposefully from the general store to the feed merchant to the post office. Penelope kept close to his side, focusing on the tasks at hand rather than the curious onlookers. At the general store, Mrs. Thornton, the proprietor's wife, eyed Penelope with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the one Xavier bought at auction. How interesting." Before Penelope could respond, Yates stepped between them. "We need flour, sugar, coffee, and salt, and fabric, whatever you have that would be suitable for a woman's dress." Mrs. Thornton raised an eyebrow but began gathering the items. As she measured out coffee beans, she continued, "People were wondering what became of you. Some thought you might not adjust to ranch life." "I've adjusted just fine," Penelope said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Indeed. And what exactly are your duties at Mr. Xavier's ranch?" The question dripped with insinuation. Yates slammed a sack of flour onto the counter, making both women jump. "That's enough, Mrs. Thornton. Our business arrangements are our own." The woman flushed but fell silent as she completed their order. When everything was paid for and loaded into the wagon, Penelope felt Yates's hand briefly touch her back. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I've faced worse than nosy shopkeepers," she replied, though her hands were still trembling. As they prepared to leave town, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A man was roughhousing with a young woman, his hand gripping her arm painfully as she tried to pull away. "Please, Frank, you're hurting me," the girl cried, her face streaked with tears. "You work for me, you do as I say," the man snarled, his words slurred with drink. Penelope recognized the girl Mary, who worked serving meals at the hotel. She couldn't have been more than 18. Before she realized what was happening, Yates had handed her the wagon reins and was striding toward the altercation. He moved with a controlled fury that straightened his already tall frame. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly quiet. The drunk man Frank turned with a sneer. "Mind your own business, Xavier. This girl works for me. She works for you. She isn't your property." Yates's hand rested casually near his hip, where Penelope now noticed he wore a holstered pistol. Frank seemed to notice it too, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "You threatening me over some serving girl? I'm asking you to let her go and sleep it off." A tense moment passed before Frank released Mary's arm with a shove. "Take her then. Worthless anyway." Mary stumbled forward and Yates steadied her. "You all right?" she nodded, rubbing her arm. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier." "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" "My aunt lives just outside town. I can stay with her." Yates nodded. "We'll take you there." As they drove away from Victor with Mary seated between them, Penelope studied Yates's profile. He'd risked himself for a girl he barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. It made her wonder about the man beneath the stoic exterior. After dropping Mary at her aunt's small homestead, they continued toward the ranch in thoughtful silence. "That was brave," Penelope finally said. "Standing up to that man," Yates shrugged. "Frank Miller's all talk when he's sober. It's the whiskey that makes him mean. Still, you didn't have to get involved." He glanced at her. "Some things you can't just ride past." "Is that why you bought me at the auction?" "Because you couldn't just ride past." The question hung in the air between them. Yates kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "Partly," he admitted after a long moment, "but I also needed help on the ranch. There were stronger workers available. Men who could do twice the work I can. Maybe." He adjusted his hat against the setting sun. "But I've worked with enough men to know strength isn't everything. Sometimes it's about having the right kind of heart." Penelope felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "And you could tell that just by looking at me on that auction platform." For the first time that day, a small smile curved his lips. "I've always been a good judge of horses and people." That evening, as Penelope worked on cutting patterns from the fabric they'd purchased, she found herself humming softly a habit she'd abandoned years ago. Across the room, Yates looked up from his ledger book, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "That's nice," he said simply, before returning to his figures. The seasons shifted from summer to fall, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The work changed with the season, harvesting the garden's bounty, preserving vegetables for winter, repairing fences and buildings before the snow came. Through it all, Penelope and Yates fell into an easy partnership, each learning the other's rhythms and needs, often without words. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Penelope working on a dress from the store fabric and Yates whittling a piece of pine, he broke their comfortable silence. "Winter's coming. Passes get snowed in sometimes. We could be cut off from town for weeks." Penelope nodded, threading her needle. "I assumed as much." "Does that worry you?" She considered the question. "No, we're well prepared. The root cellar is full and we have plenty of preserved food." "That's not what I meant." He set down his knife. "Being isolated here, just the two of us." "Does that concern you?" Penelope met his gaze across the room. "Should it? Some would think so. A woman alone with a man she barely knows. I've been here almost 4 months, Yates. I don't think you're barely known anymore." She resumed her stitching. "Besides, if you'd meant me harm, you've had ample opportunity." He seemed to relax slightly. "True enough." "Why do you ask? Are you concerned about propriety now?" "No," he admitted. "But others might be. Mrs. Thornton and her ilk." Penelope's hands stilled. "Does it matter what they think?" "Not to me." He picked up his whittling again. "But it might to you when spring comes. When spring comes, when your contract is fulfilled. You were sold for 6 months' labor to clear your debt. Come spring, you'll be free to go wherever you choose." The reminder of her status hit Penelope with unexpected force. Somehow, she'd stopped thinking of herself as an indentured worker, had begun to feel like what? A partner, a friend, something else she dared not name. "I see," she said carefully. "And you're concerned about my reputation when I leave." Yates studied the carving in his hands. "Among other things." "What other things?" He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice was unusually hesitant. "I've gotten used to having you here. The place feels different now." It wasn't a declaration of affection, not exactly, but coming from this reserved man, it felt significant. Penelope's heart beat a little faster. "Different how?" "Brighter," he said simply. "More alive." Penelope set her sewing aside, gathering her courage. "I've gotten used to being here too." Their eyes met across the firelit room, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had been ready to voice. The moment was broken by a sudden gust of wind that rattled the window panes. Yates stood, moving to check that everything was secure. "Storm's coming in," he observed, peering into the darkness. "Might be our first snow." By morning, the world outside was transformed. A blanket of white covered the landscape, softening the rugged terrain into gentle curves and hollows. Penelope stood at the cabin door, marveling at the beauty. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Yates appeared beside her, 2 steaming cups in his hands. He offered one to her. "First snow is always the prettiest. By February you'll be sick of it." She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "I doubt that. I've never seen anything so peaceful. Peaceful now. Won't be when I have to dig out to the barn." But he was smiling as he said it, a rare, full smile that reached his eyes. The snow continued through the day, keeping them mostly indoors except for essential chores. By evening, nearly a foot had accumulated, and the world was muffled in white silence. After dinner, as they sat reading by the fire, Yates suddenly closed his book. "I've been thinking," Penelope looked up, "about your situation when spring comes." She felt a flutter of anxiety. "Oh, you don't have to leave, even after your contract is fulfilled." He spoke matter-of-factly, though she noticed his knuckles were white where he gripped the book. "The ranch does better with 2 people working it. Makes sense for you to stay on, as a partner, not as what you are now." Penelope carefully placed a marker in her book. "What am I now, exactly?" He seemed frustrated by the need to define it. "You were indentured to clear a debt. That's not what I want for you going forward." "What do you want, Yates?" He stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the snowy night. "I want you to be here because you choose to be, not because you're obligated." Penelope rose and moved to stand beside him. "And if I choose to stay, what would that look like? Would I still have my room? Would I earn wages?" "Yes to wages. As for the room," he hesitated. "That would depend." "On what?" He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "On whether you might consider a different arrangement, eventually." The implication hung in the air between them. Penelope's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Yates ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation but determined to have it. "I'm not good with words, Penelope, but these months with you here, I've come to care for you, more than I expected. More than might be wise." "Why wouldn't it be wise?" "Because you're here out of necessity, not choice. Because when spring comes and your debt is cleared, you should be free to go wherever you want, without feeling obligated to an old rancher who bought you at auction." Penelope reached out, hesitantly touching his arm. "What if where I want to be is here?" He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face, searching. "Is it?" "Yes," she said simply. "It is." Yates covered her hand with his own. "I'm nearly 15 years older than you. I'm set in my ways. I live far from town, far from people. All things I'm well aware of. The scar doesn't matter to me," he said suddenly. "I need you to know that." Penelope's free hand moved unconsciously to her cheek. "It matters to most people. I'm not most people." His voice was gruff with emotion. "From where I stand, I see nothing but value in you. Your strength, your kindness, your determination. Everything about you is valuable to me." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. After years of being treated as less than human, of being seen only for her flaws and limitations, his words were almost too much to bear. "Yates," she whispered, unable to say more. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to her face. His calloused fingers gently traced the line of her scar, from temple to jaw. It was the first time anyone had touched it with tenderness rather than clinical detachment or disgust. "Beautiful," he murmured. And though she couldn't quite believe him, the sincerity in his blue eyes made her want to try. When he lowered his head to kiss her, it felt as natural as the snow falling outside, inevitable, pure, transforming. His lips were gentle on hers, the kiss careful and questioning. Penelope answered by lifting her hands to his shoulders, drawing him closer. They broke apart after a moment, both a little breathless. Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should have waited. Until spring, when you're truly free to choose." "I'm choosing now," Penelope assured him. "I've known what I wanted for longer than I've been willing to admit." His smile was slow and wondering. "And what is it you want, Penelope O'Malley?" "This," she said simply. "You, our life here." The blizzard lasted 3 days, effectively cutting them off from the outside world. They spent the time in a strange, wonderful bubble, talking more than they ever had before, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other in new ways. Yates told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war, the years of hard work to build his ranch. Penelope shared memories of Boston, her father's business, the shock of finding herself indentured after his death. Physical affection came slowly, naturally, hands touching while working together, a brush of lips in passing, sitting closer by the fire in the evenings. Yates was careful never to press, and Penelope appreciated his restraint even as she grew more certain of her feelings. On the 4th day, the storm cleared, revealing a transformed landscape glittering under a bright winter sun. Yates spent hours digging paths to the barn and other outbuildings while Penelope tended to indoor chores. By sunset, they were exhausted but satisfied with their accomplishments. Over dinner, Yates cleared his throat. "I'd like to ride into town tomorrow now that the main road should be passable." Penelope looked up in surprise. "Is something wrong? Are we short on supplies?" "No, nothing like that." He seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "There's something I need to do. Something I should have done before saying what I did the other night." "What's that?" "Speak to the sheriff about your indenture papers." He met her gaze squarely. "I want to have them officially canceled, make you legally free." Penelope set down her fork. "But that's not due until spring. I don't want there to be any question about your status here. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone in town. You're not my indentured worker, Penelope. I want that clear before anything else happens between us." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you. That means a great deal to me. I'll be gone most of the day. The roads will be slow going. I'll be here when you get back," she promised. The next day, after Yates departed for Victor, Penelope kept herself busy with chores, trying not to worry about his journey through the snow-covered terrain. She baked bread, mended a pair of his work pants, and even attempted a special dinner for his return. As dusk approached with no sign of him, anxiety began to gnaw at her. The winter days were short, and traveling in darkness was dangerous. She had just lit a lantern to place in the window when she heard the crunch of hooves on snow. Relief flooded through her as she threw open the door. Yates dismounted stiffly, his face reddened from the cold. He led his horse to the barn, and Penelope followed, eager for news. "How did it go?" she asked as he unsaddled the animal. "Well enough." He worked methodically, his movements betraying fatigue. Sheriff Morris registered the cancellation. "You're officially a free woman." "Thank you." She helped him hang up the tack. "Was there any trouble?" "Some talk. Nothing worth repeating." His jaw tightened briefly. "The important thing is it's done." When the horse was settled, they walked together to the cabin. Inside, Yates removed his damp coat and boots, warming his hands by the fire while Penelope served the dinner she'd prepared. "This smells wonderful," he said, genuinely appreciative. "You didn't have to go to such trouble." "It's a celebration," she replied, "of my freedom." They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Yates reached into his pocket. "I got something else in town." He placed a small box on the table between them. Penelope looked at it questioningly. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a simple gold band. Penelope's breath caught. "Yates." I'm not asking yet, he clarified quickly. It's too soon, I know that, but I wanted you to have this as a promise. When you're ready, if you ever are, this is waiting. Penelope carefully lifted the ring, examining its delicate engraving of intertwined leaves. It's beautiful. It was my mother's, he explained. One of the few things I brought west with me. The significance of the gift wasn't lost on her. You've been carrying this all these years, waiting for the right person, I suppose. He looked almost embarrassed. You don't have to wear it, just keep it. As a promise that whatever happens between us now, it's your choice. Always. Penelope closed her hand around the ring. I'll keep it close, she promised, until the time is right. As winter deepened, their relationship grew alongside the snowdrifts that sometimes reached the cabin windows. They established new routines, Yates teaching Penelope to shoot for protection when he had to be away from the ranch. Penelope showing him how to make the pastries she remembered from her childhood in Boston. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, discussed books and ideas, and gradually built a partnership based on mutual respect and growing affection. Physical intimacy developed naturally, each step taken with care and consideration. Yates never pushed, always letting Penelope set the pace. When they finally shared her narrow bed one snowy January night, it was with a tender passion that left them both shaken by its intensity. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Yates traced patterns on her bare shoulder. Are you all right? Penelope nodded, resting her head on his chest. More than all right. I've never. He hesitated. It's been a long time for me. I hope I didn't disappoint. She lifted her head to look at him, surprised by this hint of vulnerability from her usually confident partner. You could never disappoint me, Yates Xavier. His arms tightened around her. I keep thinking this can't be real, that I'll wake up and you'll be gone and I'll be alone again. I'm not going anywhere, she assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. This is where I belong. As February's harsh winds gave way to March's tentative thaw, their lives settled into a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. They still hadn't spoken of marriage directly, though the ring remained safely in Penelope's dresser drawer, a promise for the future. One afternoon, as the first hints of spring softened the air, a rider approached the ranch unusual enough to bring both of them out to the yard in curiosity. The man introduced himself as a messenger from Victor, bearing a letter for Penelope. For me, she asked in surprise. Who would be writing to me? The messenger shrugged. Came on the stage coach from Helena yesterday. Addressed to Miss Penelope O'Malley, care of Xavier Ranch, Victor, Montana Territory. After the messenger departed, Penelope opened the letter with trembling hands, Yates standing supportively at her side. Her eyes widened as she read. It's from a lawyer in Boston, she explained, scanning the neatly written pages. My father's former business partner has died. Apparently, he left me a small inheritance as restitution for his role in my father's financial ruin. He admitted on his deathbed that he deliberately mismanaged funds and falsified documents. Yates frowned. The man whose actions led to your indenture is only making amends now. After he's dead, better late than never, I suppose, Penelope continued reading. There's money, $5,000 and an apology. The lawyer says I need to come to Boston to sign the necessary papers. Boston. Yates spoke the word carefully, his expression guarded. That's a long journey. Penelope looked up from the letter, suddenly understanding his concern. Yates, I'm not leaving you, not permanently. $5,000 would set you up nicely anywhere you choose, he said quietly. You could start fresh, somewhere people don't know your past. She stepped closer to him, placing her hand on his cheek. My past brought me to you. I wouldn't change that for anything. You should go, he said, covering her hand with his own. Claim what's rightfully yours. Take some time to see if Boston still feels like home. And if it doesn't. His blue eyes met hers steadily. Then come back to me. I'll be waiting. Penelope shook her head. I don't need to go to know where home is. It's here with you. Even so, you should claim your inheritance. We could use it here, expand the herd, maybe build a better house. We. She repeated, a smile tugging at her lips. Yates took a deep breath. I think it's time you wore that ring, don't you? If you still want to. Instead of answering, Penelope took his hand and led him back to the cabin, to her small room where the ring waited in its box. She opened the drawer and removed it, pressing it into his palm. Ask me properly, she requested softly. Yates swallowed hard, then lowered himself to one knee before her. His usual composure was replaced by a vulnerability that touched her deeply. Penelope O'Malley, I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me and build a life here together? Yes, she answered without hesitation. With all my heart, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to kiss her a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. They were married 2 weeks later in Victor's small church, with only a few witnesses, Mary from the hotel and her aunt, the sheriff and his wife, and a handful of neighboring ranchers. Penelope wore a new dress she'd sewn herself from beautiful blue fabric ordered specially from Helena, and Yates wore his best suit, freshly pressed for the occasion. The townsfolk's attitudes had begun to shift, especially after the story of Penelope's inheritance became known. Mrs. Thornton even presented them with a wedding gift, a fine tablecloth she'd embroidered herself. Not everyone was welcoming, of course, but the couple found they cared less about others' opinions with each passing day. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch, their ranch now, truly shared between them. That night, as they lay together in the larger bed Yates had built in anticipation of their marriage, they spoke of plans for the future. I've written to the lawyer in Boston, Penelope said, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. He's agreed to handle everything by mail. The money should arrive within a month. Good, Yates murmured, stroking her hair. Though I'd have understood if you wanted to see Boston again. Maybe someday we'll go together, but for now there's too much to do here. She propped herself up to look at him. I've been thinking about how to use the money. Oh, we should expand the house, as you suggested. Add a proper kitchen, maybe another bedroom or two. She bit her lip. For the future. Yates's hand stilled in her hair. Children, you mean, if we're blessed that way, she said carefully. Would you want that? His expression softened. I never thought I'd have the chance for a family, never thought I'd find someone willing to share this life. He pulled her closer. Yes, I want that, with you. The inheritance arrived as promised, and with it came transformation. They hired workers from Victor to help expand the cabin into a proper ranch house, with a large kitchen, a comfortable sitting room, 3 bedrooms, and even indoor plumbing, a luxury few in the territory enjoyed. They increased the herd, built a new barn, and purchased better equipment for the ranch work. Penelope flourished in her role as ranch mistress and Yates's partner. The physical signs of her difficult past faded, she gained healthy weight, her complexion brightened, and though the scar remained, she no longer tried to hide it. Yates's periodic compliments and unwavering love gradually convinced her that he truly did find her beautiful, scar and all. That autumn, as the aspen leaves turned gold against the mountains, Penelope confirmed what she'd suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child. When she told Yates, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy illuminated his usually serious features, and he lifted her in a careful embrace, spinning her around their new kitchen. "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression answered the question. "Happier than I deserve to be," he replied, setting her gently on her feet. His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. Our child. A new beginning. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Yates became even more protective, insisting on handling the more strenuous chores himself and hiring extra help earlier than usual. Penelope humored him to a point, but maintained her independence where she could, continuing to manage the household and even the ranch accounts with her head for figures. In late May 1877, just as the wildflowers carpeted the valley in purple and gold, their son was born after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. They named him James, after Penelope's father, with Charles as a middle name to honor Yates's grandfather. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, holding his son for the first time, his large hands impossibly gentle with the tiny bundle. "Absolutely perfect. He has your eyes," Penelope observed from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "And your strength," Yates replied, carefully returning the baby to her arms. "Thank you for our son, for our life together." "Thank you for seeing value where others saw damage," she answered softly. His expression grew serious. "I only saw the truth, Penelope. Everything you are, everything we've built together proves how right I was that day in Victor." As spring turned to summer, the Xavier Ranch continued to thrive. Baby James grew strong, adored by both his parents. Yates proved to be a natural father, as tender with his son as he was capable in running the ranch. Penelope balanced motherhood with her partnership in the ranch operations, finding new fulfillment in their expanding family enterprise. Occasionally, they would ride together to the ridge overlooking their property, James secured in a sling against his mother's chest. From that vantage point, they could see all they had built: the expanded house, the new barn, the larger herds grazing in the valley, the garden now twice its original size. "Did you ever imagine this?" Penelope asked on one such afternoon as they sat side by side on horseback. "When you saw me on that auction platform?" Yates considered the question seriously. "No," he admitted. "I just knew I couldn't ride past, couldn't let you be treated as less than the remarkable woman you are." He reached across to touch their sleeping son's cheek. "This you, James, our home, this is more than I dared hope for." Penelope looked out over their land, remembering that day in Victor nearly 2 years earlier when she'd stood with her head bowed, believing her life was over. Instead, it had just begun. "Sometimes the most valuable treasures come in damaged packages," she said thoughtfully. Yates shook his head. "Not damaged, just waiting for someone who could see their true worth." As they rode back down to the ranch, their home, their future, Penelope felt a completeness she'd never thought possible. From damaged goods on an auction block to beloved wife, mother, and partner, her journey had been neither easy nor expected. But as Yates had said that first day, he saw nothing but value in her. And in seeing her value, he had helped her discover it herself. In the years that followed, the Xavier family continued to grow and prosper. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 2 years after James, and another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The ranch expanded further, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Yates and Penelope worked side by side through it all, their partnership deepening with each passing season. The scar on Penelope's face faded somewhat with time, becoming a silvery line rather than the angry red mark it had once been. But more importantly, she stopped noticing it, and so did others. In Victor, she was now known not as the scarred woman from the auction block, but as Mrs. Xavier, the capable ranch mistress with the quick mind and kind heart. On the 10th anniversary of the day Yates had purchased her contract, Penelope found him at dawn, standing on the porch of their home, looking out over the land they'd cultivated together. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. He covered her hands with his own. 10 years ago today, I made the best $5 investment of my life. Penelope laughed softly. Is that how you see it? An investment? Yates turned in her embrace to face her. At 45, his hair was threaded with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze was as clear and direct as ever. The return has been beyond calculation, he said, touching her cheek where the scar ran. Love, family, partnership, joy, everything that matters. I never thanked you properly, Penelope said, for seeing something in me worth saving that day. You never needed saving, Penelope Xavier. You just needed someone to recognize what was always there, your strength, your heart, your value. As the sun rose higher over their ranch, casting golden light across the buildings and fields they'd built together, they stood wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the auction that had seemed like an ending but had actually been a beginning. From damaged goods to treasured partner, from despair to hope, from isolation to family, their story had unfolded in ways neither could have imagined that day in Victor. And as their children burst from the house to start the day's adventures, calling for their parents to join them, Yates and Penelope moved forward together, hand in hand. Into the future they continued to build one day, one choice, one act of love at a time.